Captain Ryan Fletcher's eyes shot open in total darkness. His head pounded and something warm trickled down his temple. Blood. He tried to move and immediately regretted it as pain exploded through his ribs. The emergency lighting flickered once, twice, then held steady with a dim red glow that barely pushed back the shadows. The Horizon Runner was dead. Ryan could feel it in his bones. That particular silence when a ship's heart stops beating. No engine hum, no air recyclers whirring, no computer systems chirping their constant updates. Just silence and the sound of his own ragged breathing inside his helmet. He'd been hauling medical supplies to the frontier colonies when something went catastrophically wrong during the hyperspace jump. One moment he was reading a book and drinking coffee, the next moment reality twisted sideways and his ship slammed into something solid. In hyperspace. Which shouldn't even be possible. Ryan forced himself upright, every muscle protesting. His heads-up display showed the bad news in glowing red text. Hull integrity compromised. Main power offline. Life support running on emergency batteries. Oxygen remaining, 4 days, 17 hours. 4 days to live. Alone. In the middle of nowhere. He grabbed his emergency pack and cycled through the airlock. What he saw on the other side made him forget about the pain for a moment. His small courier vessel had punched through the hull of something absolutely massive. The hole his ship made looked like a bullet hole in a warehouse wall. Ryan activated his suit lights and stepped into the alien vessel. The corridor stretched away in both directions, vanishing into darkness so complete his lights couldn't penetrate it. The ceiling arched 50 feet above his head. The walls were smooth metal covered in flowing symbols that seemed to shift in the light, though that might have been a trick of his concussed brain. He recognized the symbols. Every spacer did. Vexthar. An ancient race that built massive ships and then vanished 3,000 years ago, leaving their vessels drifting as monuments to a civilization no one understood. Governments and corporations had pulled dozens of these ships into shipyards over the centuries, trying to unlock their secrets. They'd all failed. Vexthar technology simply didn't work for anyone else. The ships were beautiful, sophisticated, and completely dead. Ryan's suit registered the temperature at nearly 300 degrees below zero. No atmosphere. No power. No life. Just a massive coffin floating through the void, and now it was his coffin too. He explored for hours, mapping what he could with his suit's limited sensors. The ship was enormous, easily 3 miles long. He found cargo holds that could swallow city blocks. Engineering spaces filled with machinery that looked more like art installations than engines. And bodies. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. The Vexthar themselves still at their posts, perfectly preserved by the vacuum and cold. They'd been tall, maybe 9 feet, with 4 arms and elongated heads. They'd died at their stations, whatever catastrophe claimed them, happening too fast for evacuation. Ryan felt like he was walking through a museum, except museums didn't usually contain the mummified crew. He returned to his ship as his suit's oxygen reserves hit the warning threshold. The Horizon Runner looked pathetic, wedged into the alien hull, like a toy boat run aground. Ryan climbed back inside and sealed the airlock. The cabin still had some heat and breathable air. He could survive here for a few more days while he figured out his next move. Except there was no next move. His distress beacon was destroyed. Even if it worked, he jumped into an uncharted system. No one would find him. No one even knew where to look. Ryan ate a ration bar that tasted like cardboard and stared at his engineering console. The screen flickered with damage reports. Everything important was broken. But his eyes kept drifting to one reading that didn't make sense. His external sensors, which should have been completely fried, were picking up a faint energy signature. Not from his ship. From the alien vessel. Just a whisper of power, barely detectable, coming from somewhere deep in the engineering section. That was impossible. Vexthar ships were dead. Everyone knew that. Thousands of the galaxy's best scientists had poked and prodded these vessels for decades. Nothing. Not a spark. Not a flicker. But Ryan's sensors didn't lie. Somewhere in this frozen giant, something still held a charge. He sat up straighter, his engineer's mind already working through the implications. If there was any power at all, even a tiny amount, that meant the ship's systems weren't completely destroyed. Just dormant. Waiting. Ryan looked at his oxygen timer. 4 days, 9 hours now. He could spend those days sitting here, rationing his air, waiting for death. Or he could do something incredibly stupid. He could try to bring a dead alien warship back to life. Every expert in the galaxy would call it impossible. But Ryan had always had a problem with that word. Impossible just meant nobody had figured it out yet. He grabbed his tools and headed back into the darkness. If he was going to die anyway, he might as well die trying something worth remembering. Ryan spent the next 12 hours following that faint energy signature deeper into the alien ship. His suit lights carved tunnels through the darkness as he descended level after level. The Vexthar had built this vessel like a cathedral, every surface decorated with those flowing symbols, every junction marked with crystalline structures that caught his light and scattered it in rainbow patterns. He found the source in what had to be the main engineering bay. A chamber so vast his lights couldn't reach the far walls. Massive cylindrical structures rose from floor to ceiling like the pillars holding up the sky. The power conduit ran between them, a cable as thick as his waist, and his scanner showed that microscopic trickle of energy flowing through it. It wasn't much. Barely enough to power a flashlight. But it meant the ship's core systems were still intact somewhere, just sleeping. Waiting for someone to wake them up. Ryan returned to his dying ship and started making calculations. He had 3 days of oxygen left. His ship's fusion core was damaged but still held some charge. If he could somehow connect his power systems to the alien grid, maybe, just maybe, he could jumpstart something. The problem was compatibility. Human technology and Vexthar technology were like trying to mate a hammer with a violin. Different principles, different materials, different everything. That's why every research team had failed. They tried to understand the alien systems first, reverse engineer them, figure out the theory before application. Ryan didn't have time for theory. He needed results. He started ripping his ship apart. The emergency batteries came out first, then the backup power cells. He pulled cables from the walls, stripped circuit boards from non-essential systems, even tore out the coffee maker for its heating element. His crewmates back home would have been horrified watching him butcher a perfectly good ship. But the Horizon Runner was already dead. He was just harvesting the organs. Over the next day and a half, Ryan made 7 trips between his ship and the engineering bay, hauling equipment and tools. His ribs screamed with every load, but he ignored the pain. Pain meant he was still alive. He could deal with pain. The real challenge was figuring out how to make the connection. Vexthar power systems used some kind of crystalline matrix technology that nobody understood. Human systems ran on good old-fashioned electricity and plasma conduits. They shouldn't be able to talk to each other at all. But Ryan had noticed something during his exploration. The Vexthar conduits had junction points every 100 meters, places where smaller cables branched off the main lines. The junctions had a certain logic to them, a pattern. Energy came in, got distributed, flowed out to different systems. The shape was alien but the function was universal. He chose a junction point and started working. Using cable from his ship, he created a bridge between his fusion core and the alien conduit. The connection was ugly, held together with magnetic clamps and wrapped in heat-resistant tape from his emergency kit. Any engineering inspector would have failed him on the spot. Ryan powered up his fusion core and watched the energy flow into the alien systems. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the conduit began to glow with a faint blue light that spread outward from his connection point like frost crawling across a window. His scanner went crazy. Power readings spiked, then dropped, then spiked again. The blue glow intensified, and suddenly the junction box he'd connected to started humming. A sound. The first sound this ship had made in 3,000 years. Then everything exploded. Not literally, but the feedback surged through Ryan backward 10 feet. Sparks showered from his makeshift connection. The humming turned into a shriek of tortured metal. His fusion core's display went red with warnings. He'd overloaded something, pushed too much power too fast, and now both systems were rejecting each other like mismatched blood types. Ryan scrambled forward and killed the power. The shrieking stopped. The blue glow faded. Silence returned, heavier than before. His first attempt had failed. He sat there in the darkness, breathing hard, his oxygen timer showing 2 days and 4 hours remaining. He'd wasted precious time and gained nothing. Maybe the experts were right. Maybe this was impossible. But as his breathing slowed, Ryan noticed something. The junction box was still warm. He could feel heat radiating from it through his glove. And when he checked his scanner, that faint energy signature hadn't disappeared. If anything, it was slightly stronger than before. His attempt had failed, but it had done something. Like using jumper cables on a dead battery, he'd pushed a little bit of life back into the alien systems. Not enough to wake them up, but enough to prove they could wake up. Ryan pulled out his tools and started modifying his approach. The problem was trying to force too much energy through at once. He needed to go slower, gentler. Feed the alien systems gradually until they could handle a full charge. He rebuilt his connection, this time adding resistors and flow regulators scavenged from his ship's environmental controls. He created a step-down transformer using components that were never meant to work together. The whole assembly looked like something a child might build from random parts, but Ryan trusted his instincts. Second attempt. He brought the fusion core online at minimum power and slowly increased the flow. The conduit began glowing again, that same eerie blue light. The humming returned, but quieter this time, almost musical. Ryan watched his readings carefully, ready to shut everything down at the first sign of trouble. The blue glow spread further this time, crawling along the conduit toward the massive pillars. It reached the first pillar and climbed upward, and suddenly panels on the walls began lighting up. Alien text scrolled across displays that hadn't functioned since before humans discovered fire. The humming grew louder, deeper, resonating through the deck plates. Ryan held his breath. The power flow stabilized. The lights held steady. And then, like a wave cresting, the effect cascaded outward through the entire engineering bay. Lights blazed to life overhead. Computer systems chirped and beeped in alien languages. The massive pillars began to pulse with that blue glow, each pulse synchronized like a heartbeat. Ryan turned in a slow circle, watching an ancient alien engine room wake up around him. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He'd brought a dead Vex, their ship, back to life. His scanner showed power flowing through conduits all over this section. Not full power, maybe 15% of capacity, but it was real. The ship was alive again. Ryan checked his oxygen. 2 days, 1 hour remaining. He'd bought himself a chance. Now he needed to figure out how to use it. Ryan stood in the glowing engineering bay, watching alien systems pulse with life for the first time in millennia. The initial rush of success faded quickly as reality set in. He'd restored power to one section of a ship that was 3 miles long. He still had no breathable air outside his suit, no heat, and no way to communicate with the outside universe. And his oxygen timer kept counting down. 1 day, 20 hours remaining. Time to get to work. He started exploring the newly powered sections, trying to make sense of the alien control panels. The Vex Thar wrote in symbols that flowed like water, each character bleeding into the next. No translation software existed because nobody had ever successfully activated Vex Thar computers long enough to study their language properly. But Ryan noticed patterns. A symbol that appeared next to conduits carrying power. Another symbol near what looked like access ports. A third symbol marking junction points. He started taking notes, building his own crude dictionary based on context and function. Engineers spoke a universal language, he figured. These systems had purposes, and purposes created patterns. He found a central terminal in the engineering bay and spent 2 hours just watching it cycle through displays. The Vex Thar had used a lot of visual information, three-dimensional diagrams that rotated and expanded. Ryan recognized a schematic when he saw one, even if he couldn't read the labels. One diagram showed the entire ship laid out like a blueprint. Sections glowed in different colors. Blue meant powered, he'd figured that much out. Most of the ship showed black, dead and cold. But he could trace the power grid spreading slowly from his connection point, like veins filling with blood. Another diagram caught his attention. It showed a section near the ship's center with symbols he'd started to associate with life support. Air recycling, temperature control, gravity generators. The Vex Thar had needed to breathe and stay warm just like humans. Their systems would be different, but the goal was the same. Ryan grabbed his tools and headed deeper into the ship. The powered corridors made navigation easier. Emergency lighting had come online, bathing everything in that eerie blue glow. He passed more bodies of the Vex Thar crew, and he forced himself to stop and really look at them. They died suddenly. No signs of panic, no defensive positions. Whatever killed them had been instantaneous. Their four-fingered hands still rested on control panels. One body sat in what looked like a command chair, its elongated head tilted forward as if it had simply fallen asleep. Ryan felt a strange kinship with these ancient beings. They'd built something magnificent, sailed it through the stars, and died doing their duty. Now he was walking through their tomb, trying to bring their creation back to life. He hoped they wouldn't mind. The life support center was massive, filled with machines that looked organic rather than mechanical. Curved surfaces, flowing lines, structures that branched like trees. Ryan's scanner showed no power here yet. The conduits ran close, but they hadn't connected to this section. He spent the next 6 hours tracing power lines and making new connections. His improvised bridging technique was getting better with practice. He'd strip cable from his ship, use magnetic clamps to attach to Vex Thar conduits, and carefully regulate the power flow until the alien systems accepted the input. Each connection was a gamble. Too much power and things exploded. Too little and nothing happened. But Ryan was learning to read the feedback, to feel when the systems were ready for more energy. It was less like engineering and more like coaxing a scared animal to trust you. His fusion core was running at 60% capacity now, pushed far beyond its design specifications. It wouldn't last forever at this rate, maybe another week before it burned out completely. But Ryan only needed it to last long enough to wake up the ship's main reactors. The life support systems came online with a sound like a giant taking its first breath in centuries. Atmospheric processors began cycling, pulling trace gases from the ship's structure and converting them into breathable air. Temperature regulators hummed to life, fighting against the frozen void that had claimed this vessel. Ryan watched his environmental scanner with desperate hope. Air pressure rising. Temperature climbing from 300 below zero. It would take hours, maybe days, but this section of the ship was becoming habitable. While the systems worked, Ryan explored further. He found what looked like crew quarters, personal spaces filled with objects he couldn't identify. Storage lockers held equipment and supplies, perfectly preserved. One room contained something that looked like photos or artwork, images of beings and places from a civilization dead for thousands of years. He found the bridge by following the power conduits to their logical destination. It was spectacular. A circular chamber with walls that curved into a dome overhead. Command stations arranged in a circle facing outward. And at the center, a captain's platform with displays that wrapped around it in 3 dimensions. Ryan approached the captain's station carefully. The Vexthar who died here was larger than the others, wearing what looked like ceremonial armor decorated with those flowing symbols. The captain had died at the helm, one hand still resting on what might have been a control interface. Ryan gently moved the body aside, laying it respectfully against the wall. He felt wrong taking this being's place, but he needed access to the ship's central computer. He needed to understand what he was working with. The moment Ryan touched the control interface, the entire bridge exploded with light and sound. Holographic displays erupted around him, showing star charts and system readouts and information he couldn't begin to interpret. A voice spoke in a language that sounded like music and breaking glass combined. Ryan jerked his hand back and the displays froze. He touched the interface again and they resumed. He was controlling something but he had no idea what. He started experimenting, touching different areas of the interface and watching what happened. One gesture brought up what looked like a diagnostic screen. Ship systems displayed in that color-coded format he'd seen before. He could see his life support section glowing blue, a tiny island of functionality in an ocean of dead systems. But he could also see the main power reactors, currently black but with conduits leading to them from his position. If he could get power to the reactors, if he could bring them online, he wouldn't need his dying fusion core anymore. The ship could sustain itself. Ryan checked his oxygen. 18 hours remaining. But his environmental scanner showed breathable atmosphere in the life support section. It was thin, barely adequate, but it was there. He made his way back to life support and found a chamber that looked like an airlock. The inner door was already open. Ryan sealed it behind him and activated the cycling mechanism, praying he'd understood the controls correctly. Air hissed into the chamber. His suit sensors confirmed it was breathable, though the oxygen content was lower than ideal and the temperature was barely above freezing. Ryan hesitated for just a moment, then cracked his helmet seal. The air smelled stale and metallic, but it filled his lungs. He could breathe. For the first time since the crash, Ryan Fletcher took off his helmet and breathed air that wasn't recycled through his suit's filters. He laughed and the sound echoed through the alien chamber. He'd done it. He'd brought life support online. He'd bought himself time. Now he needed to finish the job and wake this sleeping giant completely. Ryan worked for 3 days straight, sleeping in short bursts on the bridge floor. The ship was coming alive section by section, and he was learning its language through trial and error. Every control panel became a little clearer. Every system made a bit more sense. He was thinking like a Vexthar engineer now, understanding their logic, their design philosophy. The breakthrough came when he finally traced the main power conduits to the reactor cores. 4 massive chambers deep in the ship's belly, each one containing a fusion reactor the size of a small building. They'd been in standby mode for 3,000 years, their fuel reserves still intact, waiting for a startup sequence that never came. Ryan stood before the reactor controls and studied the interface for 2 hours. This was the moment of truth. If he could bring these online, the ship would have unlimited power. If he messed up, he might trigger a meltdown that would vaporize him and everything within 100 miles. He started the sequence slowly, watching each step cascade through the systems. The reactors hummed, deep and resonant. Coolant began flowing through lines that hadn't seen use since before human civilization existed. Temperature gauges climbed. Pressure built. The hum became a roar that shook the deck plates beneath his feet. And then, like the sun rising after an endless night, the reactors came online at full power. Every system in the ship surged to life simultaneously. Lights blazed in corridors that had been dark for millennia. Computer cores booted up with musical chimes. Gravity generators activated, and Ryan stumbled as weight suddenly returned to his body. The ship was alive, truly alive, powered by its own heart again. Ryan made his way back to the bridge, feeling the thrum of energy through every surface. The command center had transformed into something magnificent. Holographic displays showed every system operating normally. The star chart updated, calculating the ship's current position. He could see everything now, understand the ship's status in ways he'd only guessed at before. According to the navigation computer, he was 70 light-years from human space. The ship had a name displayed prominently on every screen, Sovereign Dawn. And most importantly, the faster-than-light drives were functional. Ryan could go home. He spent the next several hours learning the navigation systems. The Vexthar had used quantum drives that folded space rather than punching through it like human hyperspace engines. The theory was different, but Ryan didn't need to understand the theory. He just needed to understand the controls. He plotted a course toward the nearest human outpost and began spooling up the drives. The entire ship vibrated with building energy. This was it. He was actually going to fly an alien warship that nobody in the galaxy had ever managed to activate. The Sovereign Dawn lurched into motion and Ryan whooped with joy. The ship was sluggish, responding slowly to his commands, but it was moving. He goosed the engines up to 20% power and felt the acceleration press him back into the captain's chair. Stars wheeled across the view screen as the massive vessel came about. Ryan lined up his trajectory and engaged the FTL drives. Reality twisted. The stars smeared into lines of light, and the Sovereign Dawn jumped into faster-than-light travel for the first time in 3,000 years. What Ryan didn't know was that his resurrection of the ancient warship had triggered alarms across half the sector. Commander Lisa Vrel of the Galactic Union patrol ship Vigilant stared at her sensor display in disbelief. A Vexthar power signature, active and moving under its own power. That was impossible. Completely, utterly impossible. She'd sent 3 separate requests for confirmation before accepting the readings were real. Now her entire fleet was converging on the impossible ship, weapons ready, nobody quite sure what they were dealing with. When the Sovereign Dawn dropped out of FTL near the patrol cordon, Vrel's tactical officer actually gasped. The ancient dreadnought emerged from hyperspace like a ghost made solid, its hull glowing with that characteristic blue light of Vexthar technology. It was enormous, dwarfing the patrol ships around it. Vrel opened a communication channel. Unidentified Vexthar vessel, this is Commander Vrel of the Galactic Union. Power down your systems immediately and prepare to be boarded. Silence. Then a voice responded, and Vrel nearly fell out of her chair. Hi there. This is Captain Ryan Fletcher, formerly of the human courier ship Horizon Runner. I'm currently operating the Vexthar vessel Sovereign Dawn, and I'm afraid I can't power down. Took me way too long to get everything running, and I'm not totally sure I could start it all back up again. A human. A single human was flying a Vexthar warship. Vrel struggled to process this information. Captain Fletcher, how exactly did you come to be operating a vessel that every expert in the galaxy considers impossible to activate? Ryan's response sounded almost embarrassed. Well, my ship crashed into this thing during a bad hyperspace jump. I was stranded with limited oxygen, so I started tinkering. One thing led to another, and I managed to get the power systems online. Then life support. Then the reactors. Then I figured, why not try to fly it home? You tinkered with it, Vrel repeated flatly. Yeah, I'm an engineer. Tinkering is kind of what we do. The fleet science officer broke into the channel, her voice high with excitement. Captain Fletcher, do you have any idea what you've accomplished? Research teams have studied Vexthar technology for decades without success. You've single-handedly solved one of the greatest mysteries in the galaxy. Ryan laughed. I wouldn't say solved. I just needed it to work, so I made it work. Didn't really have time for the theoretical stuff, you know? I was too busy trying not to die. Vrel regained her composure. Captain Fletcher, that vessel represents an incalculable scientific and strategic asset. I'm ordering you to hold position while we arrange for a research team and military escort. With respect, Commander, no. Ryan's voice was polite but firm. I salvaged this ship. I repaired it. I brought it back to life when everyone said it was impossible. Under maritime salvage law, the Sovereign Dawn is mine. I'm taking her to Earth, and anyone who wants to study her can file the proper requests through official channels. Vrel felt her frustration rising. Captain, you're piloting a warship from an extinct civilization. You cannot simply claim ownership and fly off into the sunset. Actually, I think I can. But tell you what, I'll make you a deal. Clear me a flight path to Earth, and I'll give a full demonstration of how I got everything working. I'll even answer questions. But I'm going home, Commander. I've been stranded in the dark for 2 weeks, I've eaten nothing but emergency rations, and I really want to see my family again. Before Vrel could respond, Ryan did something that ended all argument. The Sovereign Dawn spooled up its FTL drives, calculations running across its ancient computers, and jumped into hyperspace right in front of the patrol fleet. A perfect jump. Clean entry, no distortion, textbook execution. Except textbooks didn't cover Vex-Thar drives because nobody knew how to use them. Until now. Vrel slumped in her chair and started drafting her report. Command was never going to believe this. A human engineer, stranded and desperate, had accomplished what the galaxy's best minds couldn't manage in decades of trying. And he'd done it simply because giving up wasn't an option. The Sovereign Dawn emerged from hyperspace near Earth's orbital stations, and every sensor in the system locked onto it immediately. Defense grids powered up. Military ships scrambled. News networks interrupted regular programming. A Vex-Thar warship, active and under power, had just appeared in humanity's home system. Ryan sat in the captain's chair, watching the chaos unfold on his communication channels. Dozens of voices talking over each other, demanding identification, asking questions, some threatening to open fire if he didn't respond immediately. He took a deep breath and opened a general broadcast. This is Captain Ryan Fletcher to all Earth Defense Forces and anyone else listening. I know this looks crazy, but I promise I'm friendly. My ship crashed into this Vex-Thar vessel 2 weeks ago in uncharted space. I managed to repair it and fly it home. I'm requesting docking clearance at Earth Station 3. Also, if someone could have a hot meal and a real bed ready, I'd really appreciate it. The communication channels fell silent for a moment. Then a familiar voice came through and Ryan felt tears spring to his eyes. Ryan? Is that really you? It was Amanda Peterson, his supervisor at the courier company. We got your emergency beacon fragments 3 days ago. We thought you were dead. Almost was Amanda. It's a long story. Can I come home now? You're piloting a Vex-Thar warship. Yeah, that's part of the long story. Within hours, Ryan was the most famous human alive. He docked the Sovereign Dawn at Earth Station 3, and the crowd that gathered was immense. Scientists, government officials, military commanders, journalists, all of them wanting to know how a courier pilot had accomplished the impossible. Ryan stood before the press conference exhausted, wearing borrowed clothes because his own were filthy and torn. He told them everything. The crash, the dying ship, the desperate gamble to restore power. He explained his improvised connections, his trial-and-error approach to alien systems, how he'd learned to read Vex-Thar interfaces through pattern recognition and engineering instinct. A researcher from the Galactic Technology Institute raised her hand. Captain Fletcher, our best teams have studied Vex-Thar vessels for 30 years without managing to activate a single system. How did you succeed where they failed? Ryan thought about that for a moment. I think maybe they were trying too hard to understand it first. They wanted to know the theory, the science, the why behind everything. I just needed it to work. I treated it like any broken machine. Find the power source, trace the connections, figure out what connects to what, and start building bridges. Sometimes you don't need to understand why something works, you just need to make it work. Another reporter stood up. What are your plans for the vessel? Several governments have already expressed interest in purchasing it. The Sovereign Dawn isn't for sale, Ryan said firmly. But I'm not keeping her secrets either. I'm publishing everything. Every connection I made, every technique I used, every pattern I identified. I'm putting it all out there for free for anyone who wants to learn. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. A military general looked horrified. Captain, that's strategic technology. You can't just give it away. Ryan met his eyes. Watch me. I was dying alone in the dark and I figured this out with hand tools and spare parts. Imagine what people could accomplish with proper resources and collaboration. The Vex-Thar built incredible things and then all that knowledge died with them. I'm not letting that happen again. This information belongs to everyone. And he did exactly that. Over the next month, Ryan published detailed documentation of everything he'd learned. He held workshops teaching engineers his techniques for interfacing modern technology with Vex-Thar systems. He opened the Sovereign Dawn for research teams, walking them through every repair he'd made, explaining his thought process. The impact was immediate and profound. Within 6 months, 3 more derelict Vexthar vessels were successfully reactivated using Ryan's methods. Research teams that had spent decades studying alien technology suddenly had functional examples to work with. The principles Ryan discovered through desperate improvisation led to breakthroughs in power generation, FTL drive efficiency, and systems integration. Human engineers became the most sought-after specialists in the galaxy for restoration work on ancient technologies. Their reputation for creative problem-solving and refusal to accept impossible as an answer became legendary. Other species started hiring human engineers specifically for projects involving incompatible or poorly understood systems. Ryan spent 2 years fully restoring the Sovereign Dawn, bringing every system online, learning all her secrets. The ship became a living classroom where he taught hundreds of students the art of making impossible things work. He never charged for the lessons. The knowledge was free just like he'd promised. The Galactic Technology Institute offered him a position as Director of Ancient Technology Studies. Major corporations offered him blank checks for consulting work. Military organizations wanted him to train special engineering units. Ryan turned them all down. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone. He took the Sovereign Dawn and started a rescue and recovery service. Ships got lost, stranded, damaged in deep space all the time. Ryan would take his ancient warship to wherever they were, usually in places no one else could reach, and bring them home. He never charged the people he rescued. The Sovereign Dawn had saved his life, and now he used her to save others. On the ship's bridge, Ryan kept a small memorial. The name of the Vexthar captain who died in that chair 3,000 years ago, translated as best he could manage. Captain Velthorin, who'd built something meant to last, something that refused to die even after millennia of silence. People asked Ryan why he didn't sell the ship, why he didn't capitalize on his fame, why he spent his time rescuing strangers instead of getting rich. His answer was always the same. I was dying in the dark and this ship saved me. Not because it was new or perfect but because someone built it to last, built it to be fixed, built it to serve. The Vexthar understood something important. Technology isn't about being the smartest or having the best resources. It's about solving problems, helping people, making things work when they need to work. That's what engineering really means. 5 years after his resurrection of the Sovereign Dawn, Ryan received a message from the edge of explored space. A colony ship had suffered catastrophic damage and was stranded with 3,000 people aboard. Their distress call said their situation was impossible, their ship too damaged to repair. Ryan smiled as he read the message. He'd heard that word before. He plotted a course, spooled up the ancient Vexthar drives and jumped into hyperspace. The Sovereign Dawn flew through the stars, a 3,000-year-old warship brought back to life by a human who refused to give up, now carrying that same stubborn determination to help others. The Vexthar had built their ships to last forever. Ryan Fletcher had proved they succeeded. And in doing so, he'd shown the galaxy what humanity brought to the stars. Not superior weapons or advanced technology, but an unshakable belief that impossible just meant nobody had figured it out yet. And humans were really, really good at figuring things out.